My name is Gabriel Nagme. I'm a web analyst for Portland Community College here in beautiful Portland, Oregon. Today it's outstanding weather. I actually work at the Sylvania campus, which is just right up the hill here. So it's really nice to be here. But I do have to admit right off the bat that I am not a professional cartographer. That is not what I do for a living. I'm a web geek like a lot of the people here. But I do have, well, I'd say a love for maps. And I feel like I had a love for maps for a long time. So in preparing for this talk, I was trying to think back to the first map that I fondly remember. The first time that a map made an impression on me, the first good map. And it wasn't necessarily the globes in my classroom. It wasn't that really brightly four-color map of the United States that I had to memorize. To me, this is the first map that I remember. And some of you may recognize it. It's from a little book you might have heard of called The Hobbit. And I remember reading this as a kid, and the illustration is right here. It's in the first couple of pages. You open up the book, at least in my edition, there's this beautiful map of Middle-earth right here. And it is a wonderful illustration, but it didn't mean anything to me. Right? There is no path shown. There's no dotted line showing the path you're going to take across this. There is no "you are here." There's not even an X marks the spot. But what's interesting was as I started to get into the adventure, as I started to read the story, I constantly flipped back to this map. So I was able to see where I was. I was able to say, okay, we started off in the Shire, and then we visited the Elves in Rivendell, down there in the lower left-hand corner. I cut this map off a little bit. And now we're in Gollum's Cave in the Misty Mountains. We have done so much so far. We've had such an adventure, and we have so much farther to go. So this map alone, without all of those necessary cues that were on there, gave me an entire context for the story and really made a world in my mind. Now, if I was a cartographer, I would probably say that this map is missing a lot of the essential items that a map should have. It's missing a compass. It's missing a key. There is no information about what the scale is or even what the scale is measured in. We don't know if Middle-earth is using miles or kilometers or furlongs. We just don't know. There's not even GPS coordinates on this thing. But to me, personally, I think this does at least two of the three things that all good maps need to do. And it does them quite well. The first and the most important one that I consider a map needs to show is it needs to show the relationships between places. And this seems kind of obvious, right? That's what maps do. But it needs to show it in an intuitive way. Because as humans, this is how we give directions. When somebody comes up to me on my campus, and the Sylvania campus is interesting, it was started back in the 1960s or 70s on a steep hillside. The buildings are all different shapes on different levels. You'll exit floor 1 and you'll enter floor 2 on another one. There's sky bridges. It's really a mess. So when someone comes to me and says, how do I get to the TCB building, the Technology Communications building? I don't say, well, you're going to want to go 300 feet to the south and then 200 feet to the east. That's not how humans communicate at all. What I say is, okay, we're at the CC building, the College Center. You're going to go across that courtyard right there, around the library, and the TCB's on the other side. So by setting up these relationships for your users, all your users, whether they can visually see the map or not, helps them navigate thanks to your maps. So that's the first thing, and I think one of the most important things, because it sets up the second thing, which is a good map should show a sense of place, a sense of scale, and a sense of distance. You don't need to overload your map with all of the keys and all the distance scales and everything else. If they can figure out where they are and how that relates to the map, they can figure out all of these other things they need to know to get where they need to go. I think a good example of that is a little map that they handed out of the building here where all the rooms were. It had very minimal information, but it was perfect for finding our way between rooms. So keep those things in mind, and keep those things in mind for all of your users. That's a big, important point of what we're trying to say today. But for this third point, I do want to bring up another example really quickly. And because I've kept a love for maps my entire life, and just last week, because I'm an outdoor enthusiast, I like hiking, biking, mountain climbing, that kind of stuff, a buddy asked me to take him on Mount Adams, which is a 12,000-foot stratovolcano in southern Washington, about a 3-hour drive from here. One of my favorite places in the entire country. It's beautiful up there, and I've done this climb many times. It's not a technical climb, it's just a long, steep trudge up the mountain. And it's, again, just absolutely fabulous. So I've done it many times, it's not technical, But when you're on a mountain, you should always have a map. Unfortunately, I had somehow lost my Forest Service map on a previous climb. And you know what I'm talking about. It's like one of those road maps. It's really thick, takes about a second to unfold, and then 10 minutes to try to fold back up. So this was the night before we left, and I was trying to think about where I could go get a map. And luckily, there's lots of online services where you can get maps now, really nice ones. And one of my favorites is called CalTopo or CalTopo. And this is a service where you can zoom in from the world into the spot that you want to see. You can throw the overlay that you want, the type of map. So in this case, I just want a Forest Service map. You can then trace really easily the actual trail that you're going to take. And you can print yourself out a nice little 8x10 map. You can even put it on your phone if you don't want to carry a physical map, though. Can't always trust technology in that way, so I always try to carry a physical map. And the convenience of this was great. If that's all it did, this little map would already be better because of its portability than the giant map that I paid a lot of money for. But it gets better. Because this is online, they can offer you a lot more. And with one click, now that I've traced out this line, it can give me a profile of the actual climb. All of this extra information. It can tell me how far I'm going to be going, the elevation gain, the slope at any one point, which is really important to know for climbing. It even tells me the land coverage. So how much exposure we're going to have, how much treed versus exposed surfaces we're going to have, which was really important because there were gale force winds up there when we did the climb last Friday. And again, if that's all it did, that would be wonderful. But this is an online map. Features can be added on a regular basis, which is something you should also be thinking about when you're creating your maps. And just, I think, about 2 weeks ago, CalTopo hooked into the Sentinel satellite data, which, for better or worse, gives real-time, fairly high-quality imagery of the entire country about once a week. So I was able to go on there and see a picture from Wednesday, and I was doing the climb on Friday, of what the actual mountain looked like. And this is a game changer for mountain climbing and hiking in general. I was able to look at this and go, okay, my road all the way up there, the 30 miles of dirt road, is completely snow-free. I don't need to bring chains, but most of our climb is going to be on snow, so I need to bring the right gear. I need to bring some warm clothes. I need to bring an ice axe. And this was amazing. And I think it illustrates really well that your map needs to give accurate and up-to-date information. An outdated map, a non-accurate map, is worse than no map at all. And so as we go about talking about building systems to give this information, create maps for all of your users, think about not just doing this once, but how you're going to maintain the content over time. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but at least at my college, things are changing all the time. There's constant construction and things need to be updated, and that is actually a big piece of the work, thinking about how we're going to set these things up. All right, so what are we actually going to talk about today? That was really just a long introduction. I want to talk about the evolution of maps at PCC, the history of what we've done, see if it mirrors what you've done at your own institution, see where everybody's at. I, of course, want to talk about integrating maps into WordPress because this is a WordPress conference, and it'd be a little silly if we didn't. I'm going to be looking at that at a fairly high level, with just a little tiny bit of code, but I'm always open if people want to talk code later. And then we're going to be talking about accessibility throughout the entire thing in pieces, but I want to take a few moments at the end to really focus on our considerations for accessibility, the things that we on the web team working with disability services really focused on when doing these maps. Sound good? All right, so what you need to know about Portland Community College, and some of this was alluded to in the introduction, is that we are a really big place. We have 4 comprehensive campuses with lots and lots of buildings. We have 10, I think, maybe even 11 now. I think we added one recently, centers scattered around the district. So some of these are a single one-story building. Some of them are large multi-story buildings. Some are, multiple buildings. We also have dozens, if not hundreds of places out in the community where people can take continuing and community education classes. So it's a lot of stuff to map. We also have a lot of students. So it fluctuates with the economy because we are a 2-year school, but we can serve up to 100,000 students a year, which means not only do we have a lot of people looking at our website from a lot of different places and a lot of different backgrounds and a lot of different abilities, but we also have a really high amount of traffic. So we need to have something that a lot of people can use. All that said, when I started college about 10 years ago, this was the map that you could find online. And it is a map in several ways. If you're familiar with Portland, you can kind of see that there's some rivers there. There's the Willamette going north-south, hitting the Columbia coming across. There's some of the major roadways. Some of them have labels on them. And then there's numbers for all of the different places, those locations at PCC. But there's a lot wrong with this map. There's very little detail on this map. It doesn't set up those relationships really well, except maybe if you're trying to drive to a certain area of Portland. I believe this was originally posted just as image. So, if it had been text, at least somebody could get the address out of there with a screen reader. But at this point, you couldn't get anything out of there at all. It was completely useless. No matter what your ability was, it was fairly useless. It went to show that we have a lot of locations, and generally which one might be closest to you. But there were other maps actually at the time, and these maps were at the entrances to the campuses. So once you have found your way to a campus, there was physical signage there put together by facilities and marketing, some combination of the two, that showed quite a bit more detail. And so here you can see we're getting better already. Here we have the actual individual buildings. They each have a name on them. You can see, if you can see the map, the associations and relationships between the buildings and where you might enter the college. And if you can kind of decipher it, it kind of shows where parking is, if you can tell what that is, although it's not labeled. But again, there were a lot of problems. For one, there were 14 or more of these individual maps. There wasn't a central place to go to get map data at the college. Accessibility-wise, if we did our job right, you could pull the text, you could pull the names of the buildings and the fields out of there, but there was none of the relational data there. There was nothing that told you that building 1 was next to building 7, or what buildings were close to the bus stop if you arrived on TriMet coming in. So none of that relational data was there for someone who couldn't physically see the map. Another big problem was as soon as we posted these online, people started asking us to add stuff. So you can see this is kind of a snapshot when we had the safe assembly areas, which are an obvious thing, and Wi-Fi must have been pretty new, because we'll show the 3 or 4 buildings that actually had Wi-Fi at the time. But there were a lot of requests, right? So people were asking for the maps to show student services, cafeterias, bookstores, libraries, all sorts of wonderful things. But this kind of map, this flat PDF map, cannot accommodate that. It would just get overloaded way too fast. I think there were some more iterations of this map where we did overload it a bit, and at that point we had to scale it back and say, okay, we need another solution. Luckily at the time, and I'm hoping like a lot of you, we started converting things online. So this is a redux of that same map I've done in Google Maps. And Google Maps was great. It was a free service at the time. It was really pretty easy to hook into and redo the maps. And so this afforded us a lot of opportunities to start thinking about the expansion. First of all, we can now have one page that showed all the maps, and we could select, somebody could zoom out of Rock Creek, this is the Rock Creek campus, zoom in on the Sylvania campus, and see both at the same time. They could see the directions and the roads between them, they could see whatever level they wanted. But it also afforded us the opportunity to start adding layers that the user could interact with on this map. And one of the first things, of course, that we added was a layer, so if they wanted to, they could see parking, and not just relatively where parking was, but what types of parking. So whether you have accessible parking, motorcycle parking, where the bus was for a lot of people coming in on transit, so they would know where on the campus to get to. So at least for people who could see the map, we started developing these relationships more and being able to add more and more information to the map. Now, at this point, though, there were a lot of requests coming in for things to be added to the map. And 2 of them really stick out in my mind and shape the direction that we took with mapping at PCC. The first was that I was contacted by the art department at Rock Creek, actually, who said, hey, did you know that the college has hundreds of pieces of public art? I said, no, I did not know that. Their intention was to put together a map for walking tours, both for classes, students, and faculty, but also for the public to be able to come and see and view all of the art over the entire campus. And they brought a binder with everything labeled out and descriptions and photographs of the art pieces, and there were hundreds of them. I said, okay, this is actually pretty cool. You've already done a lot of the work. You've curated all of the content. So let's see what we can do to help you get this online. And what I ended up doing was sitting down with the champion of this. We did have to have a single person who was going to do a lot of this data entry because I couldn't do it myself. And I showed him how to use Google Earth. So we had a separate application that he had to learn. We had to do a bunch of training in it, show him how to zoom in from the world view all the way to where it was and kind of figure out where the pieces were and drop them on a map. There were several pieces where he had to actually go out and get GPS coordinates to get them on that map. But he did a really, really good job. You know, it took, I think, several months to get all that data into Google Earth, to get it pinned on the map, to put all the relevant data with it. And at that point, we were able to spit out from Google Earth a KML file, which is just an XML file that it uses for this kind of GPS data. And luckily, that format was one that we could pull right into our Google Map. So it worked really well. It was a lot of work. As things started to develop over time, as things started to change, as our pieces were moved or decommissioned or worked on, updating this map was a total pain. So we either had to touch the KML directly, which only we could do, or we had to get back to his original Google Earth file that he was working with and import the entire thing and hope it didn't break in the process. And then once he left, the next person trying to deal with it, we had a whole thing about retraining. And so that took a lot of our time. So it did work. It was nice. But then a second person came along. And this was the head of our disability services department, Kayla. And we work really, really closely with Kayla. We're on the accessibility committee. We help form the accessibility policy for the entire college. They help us a lot with building and testing the accessibility of the website. So she said that she'd seen the art map and loved it and wanted to do the exact same thing for accessible features, all accessible features over the entire district. So we're talking elevators, ramps, door openers, accessible bathrooms, actually all bathrooms with different levels of accessibility, because if you need to do a bathroom quickly, that's really an access thing. You know which one's closest to you. Student services, and on and on and on. So this is potentially thousands and thousands and thousands of markers. And so we realized at this point we needed a new solution. We needed something more holistic going forward to let people themselves curate their own map content. And the big question for us really, really was at this point, why are we treating map content differently? We already were running WordPress to do a lot of things with content. We were running it to have blogs. We were running it as a content management system. We run a couple multi-site setups with hundreds of sites, each in them. We were using it to let faculty create their own kind of personal, professional web pages, these self-service web pages. We were using it for emergency communications. We have an off-site system where people can post alerts. We've even used it in the past to gather user-generated content, so alumni stories, alumni photos, things like that. So we're using WordPress to curate all these types of content. It was time to really have the discussion about bringing map content into WordPress. So we had a bunch of meetings, sat down with disability services, sat down with the art people because it was going to be a big change on their end, sat down with a lot of our constituents, and tried to come up with what the goals were. And the number one goal in this entire project was to make it easy to create and update map content. I didn't want to do any more training with Google Earth. I wanted to do as little training as possible, and that's one of the things that I love about WordPress and always have, is that we have initial training and documentation, and then we let people go, and other than how they write their content, they usually don't mess things up. There's a great user interface, and people can do things a lot themselves. Part of making it easy, though, is we wanted to make sure that the locations were customized. We didn't want every time somebody wanted to drop a pin, like in Google Earth, they had to zoom in from outer space and find the building, find the campus, find the building, find the floor, and so on and so forth. We wanted to make sure that we could customize it to our institution so people could, on the back end, drop pins really quickly, and on the front end, find the accessible features in their building really, really quickly. We also wanted to make sure that we customize the markers, because the pins that are being dropped for art are not the same pins for display services. And we didn't want a list of hundreds and hundreds of pins that you had to sort through just to drop them. We wanted to make it as easy as possible. We also wanted to make sure that up front we required all the information that was needed to make this as accessible as possible. And this comes back to those relationships. We wanted to make sure that when somebody marked a location, that that information was provided in an alternative that could be used by anyone. And the final one, which is kind of out there, not really connected to the next, but of course you gotta have it, people wanted floor plans. They wanted to actually see the internal structure of the buildings. I don't blame them. It makes dropping pins a lot easier. It makes getting between classes a lot easier. So this became a large part of this project. All right, our decision, there's probably a lot of ways to do it. But our decision was to simply create a custom post type. So in WordPress, when you log in there, and this is true not just for disability services and art, but this is true for anybody in our network, hundreds and hundreds of sites for different departments, they can create posts, they can add media, they can create pages, and they can create place marks. That's what we ended up calling this. So it's right there on the forefront. We don't necessarily provide training directly for this. We just threw it right there into the editor, and people can go ahead and use it. So Placemark has two blocks, chunks of content that people have to deal with right off the bat. The place, that's the location where they're dropping the pin, where they want to put something. And of course the mark. What is it that they actually are marking on their map? So we're going to look at those in a little bit of detail to see what we're requiring. The place, the location, is essentially that map. Just like in Google Earth, we want to know where you are. We want to get out some information. But I just want to show this example that if you start at a map of the United States or the world, this is going to be a tedious, long process to zoom in. That's not what we should be doing. So we decided to, and we're going to show that in a little bit of detail in a minute, I'll show that, create a hierarchy that matches what the college uses. So for us, that's campus, building, floor at this point. Right? If we get people to the floor that they're on, things are going to go a lot smoother. So right at the top, the first thing they have to do that's required is select their campus. They select Southeast, and it propagates a thing of the buildings that are there on Southeast. They select the building, and it propagates a list of the floors, each time zooming in closer and closer to their destination. And when they select the floor, it doesn't need to zoom in anymore because you're already on the building looking at it from way above. But what it does do is it pulls in the floor plan. Which again, we'll talk a little bit more about how we actually get those in there. And so that they can, at this point, simply click on the map, drop their pin on the room or in the hallway or in the place that they want, and that's it. Makes it really, really fast for dropping these pins. Makes it so it requires zero training in most cases for people to use this because it's a very intuitive thing. And we use this location hierarchy, which we're going to look at, for multiple things. This isn't just for the convenience of dropping pins. We're actually using this on the front end to let people filter what they want to see and also to display that relational information, right? We have descriptions of all the buildings so that people can get a context for the shape of the building, where the entrances and exits are, whether or not they can actually see the map itself. So by doing this, every person who drops a pin is helping us set up that relational data. And so we wanted to put it in a way that didn't seem like it was tedious to do. It actually helps them in the pin dropping process. Now, all of this, of course, is just kind of fluff and a nice user interface to get the GPS coordinates. So we put in boxes for those in case people want to edit those manually. I don't think I've ever seen somebody edit them manually, but if they wanted to, they could. They could go out there with their mobile device and find the actual GPS. We did also add that little use current location button. This was a request from somebody in, I forget exactly who at this point. I think it was somebody in the initial talk about this. And I didn't think anybody would use it. It uses the geolocation data in your device to actually mark where you are right now and zoom the map right into it. It's really, really easy to set up. And it wasn't until I was working with one of the art faculty and I was in her office, and I was trying to explain it. She was asking me what it was, and she wasn't really getting it. Then all of a sudden, she grabbed my laptop and ran out of the room down the hall to where there were a bunch of paintings on the wall and started just hitting the button. And just that simple, she was marking where these pieces of art were. And it was great. I realized that for people who are really into that and enthusiastic, this is just a little feature that helps them get into it. It's fine by me. It's not actually how most people use these maps. Finally, and really, really important for our talk, every single time you create a place, for a place mark, you also have to, and are required, to write an alternative text description of this location. So this is what sets up those relationships, right? And just like all tags on images, we can require them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to use them well. And so not only did we talk with disability services closely about how do we format these, what's the most important information. So coordinates, north side, south side are nice. But even better is to give information about what room it's by, what area it's by, so that when somebody arrives at that location, in this case, they know that if they're at room 143, they know there's an accessible bathroom right across the hall. So that sets up the relationship really, really nice. It does mean that we do have to go through these and audit them from time to time. People will sometimes not put in great information. And so we work closely with disability services to do that, to make sure that we have good examples and that people are actually using these well. Quickly on the flip side of things, the mark is the other piece. And the only required thing on mark is to choose one of your marker types. Again, this list is propagated from data, which we'll see in a second, which is customized to the site we're on. So art's going to have paintings, sculptures, photographs. Disability services for the access map are going to have accessible restrooms, ramps, elevators, things like that. There is, though, a bunch of optional stuff. And this is also the map can be used for multiple purposes. When disability services is dropping pins, they just want to mark all of the accessible bathrooms. These accessible bathrooms don't have titles. They're just accessible bathroom, and that's what's going to show up, women's restroom fully accessible. But all of the art pieces do have a title. Each of those paintings has a name, and it has a little more optional text, a description of it, and it has a link to a page with a beautiful image and lots more description about the art and the text. So this allowed us to, if people want to use it, set up maps that are gateways to more information, or they're just maps by themselves for getting around the college. It can be used for either one. I will say that the example we have under optional text, we put in there because, especially for disability services, when they're putting things down, they're asking people to put in any extra information they might need. So if there's special access to a room, if the room is a weird structure, if it's off kilter a little bit, this is where you can put extra information for people who can't actually see the map. All right, so getting those customizations in there really quick. Again, there's probably a lot of ways to do this. We chose one of the simplest solutions. We chose to set up some settings that only we see as admins, and we use JSON to do that. So if you're not familiar with JSON, it's just structured data, arbitrarily structured data. So like XML, it's really condensed, and it lets us set things up very, very quickly and customize things. And we have this both at the network level, which for us, that's where we set the location data, so everybody sees the same locations when they go into the interface. But the markers are individualized for the individual sites and what they need to see for pins. And so what does that look like? For markers, it's really quite simple. You can see it's just a list of the different types that we want them to be able to drop pins on the map with. So each one just has a name, and it has an image source. And that image source can live in the media library. It can live on Amazon Web Services. It really doesn't matter. We're just pulling this in as an image. And what this means is that if we update our icons, which we probably actually need to do at this point, or if we even change the name of something, if it's not safe assembly area anymore, if it's something else, we can change it in one place. All the pins that have been marked get changed. All the pins on the front end get changed as well. And everybody's happy. There's not a lot of manual work. The same is true in a basic way for locations. So this is how we put locations in there. Here's our campuses. We're at the Cascade campus. Here's the latitude and longitude of that center point I want to zoom in on, both on the front end and the back end. Here's the zoom level, because some of our campuses are really big, some of our locations are really small, so we want to give them a nice thing there. But that's not the end of it, right? We've got this hierarchy of locations that we've built. So every location can have more locations in it. This is just nested data. Again, we could have used any kind of format we want. Because we're the only ones touching it, this was the simplest thing to do at the time. So at the Sylvania campus, we have different buildings. And each building, again, has a name. It's got its location. It's got its Zoom data, so we can give a nice interface there. And then it also has, at this level at least, a description. And this is an extended description from Disability Services. We work them closely to say what is the shape, what are the access points, what is something that people who can't see the map need in order to interact with this building properly. And one more level down, every building location also has a set of locations, in this case floors. And we don't necessarily need to add more GPS data here because we're on it, but this is where we hook into the floor plans. Now, talk about floor plans a tiny bit more right after this, but I do want to say that this kind of structure, being arbitrary like this, with the system we built, would work for anything. You know, your institution maybe doesn't have different campuses, so you'd only have 2 of these levels. You'd have your buildings and your floors. Maybe you want a larger mapping project where you've got countries, states, cities, neighborhoods. That would work perfectly fine too. And then you just have to decide what happens at each of these levels. Are you zooming in more? Does it need a description for people to follow? What's necessary? Okay, floor plans. So this was a big, big piece of time on this project, and it continues to be a big piece of this time. So using the system and using the JSON to get those pictures in there is easy. The hard part is getting the pictures and getting the data you need for them. So a lot of our time was spent, not by me, but with my coworkers, working with disability services, working with facilities to A, get permission to use the floor plans, because for a long time they considered it a security risk, which is completely ridiculous because these are public information. They're also posted inside of every building. But the push was, the thing that got them to push that was when disability services stepped into the room and said, no, we need these for accessibility reasons. We need these so people can actually find where the accessible bathrooms are close to them. And suddenly, facilities didn't have a problem with it, and they worked with us really, really well. They do have to be pulled out of their system, so not just format-wise and the images that we can use, because they use a system called Revit. It's basically a CAD system. But they have to be optimized quite a bit. So the original system shows way, way, way too much information. It'll show room numbers for every single closet that's out there, which we don't need. We don't need students knowing where all the closets are. It would show every single toilet and every single bathroom. That's a little more information than we actually need on these kind of maps. And so once we got them, my coworker spends a bit of time making sure they're oriented in the right direction, because of course none of our buildings actually lie north-south, and they're optimized to go on the web. At that point, we can simply link to them, and we're good. However, as you can see on this one, there's construction going on. There's always construction going on somewhere. So, this process is not a one and done kind of thing. When you're planning on doing maps and adding floor plans, you got to think about the process going into the future. And so we've got an entire wiki that we've held together for how this process works, who needs to be contacted, what things need to be done. And even today, or the other day, my coworker was just telling me that we got another request from someone saying, hey, why isn't the map updated to reflect this? On this other campus that I've never visited and don't know anything about and didn't know there was construction on it. So keeping information up to date is really, really important. You have to have a plan or at least a process in place. We've also found that end users are awesome at letting us know when things are broken if you give them the opportunity to do so. So our maps always have a feedback link right on them if something is wrong or broken. And so that information will come back to us. We can then go back to facilities and say, has this building changed? And start the process so we can get accurate and good information. All right, so the map data is collected. And I just want to, of course, try to do a quick live demo of what this actually looks like on both the front end and the back end. We'll see if it works. So this is live. This is the Disability Services website. And you can see right now there are some, well, probably not because it's a tiny screen, but there are some 800 pieces that are in there, and every single one has an extended description. So here's the actual interface they use. Placemark sits right alongside of pages and posts. It's really quick to access. They can come in here, change the building. Let's go to Sylvania because I know it. And let's go to the TCB building. We zoom in. And let's go to the 3rd floor and drop a marker. And this marker can be changed, and the page can be updated, which I will not do because this is live data, but it can be changed just that easily, and suddenly it's being reflected on the live maps. So giving people an easy way to update this is the only way that this information is going to be updated. You can also see at this level, oh, well, yeah, again, you probably can't because it's really small, but we use that location data here for sorting. So it's not just for getting the relationships and zooming in, but we also have it so that coming back to your 880-something markers, you can go through and find the one you're looking for. On the front end, we actually provide several flavors of maps. So maps are never a one-size-fits-all. I mean, Google Maps tries to do that, but at least for us, we have pages that just for the bookstore, it just needs one pin that shows where the bookstore is, and that's all. It needs minimal other information. Then we've got a district-wide map that shows everything all at once and lets you turn things on and off. But the most popular flavor is what the accessible building feature map does, which it lets you filter a little bit. So here, all of this data is being pulled out. You can select what kind of features you want. If you just want to see the lifts, or let's find, do we have elevators in this building? Okay, so you can just find the elevator closest to you, or women's restroom fully accessible right on the map. And you can change your building, change your floor, and it pulls out just the information that you need. So it's a nice little way to filter it. So that front end was actually the easier part. Once we have the data collected, figuring out how to display it is much, much easier. And we do use ARIA technology when we need to, but a lot of what we did on the front was building those relationships in those text forms. So let's talk about that for a second. Considering the accessibility. So there were three main concerns that came up when working closely with disability services. The first one was to make sure that the external maps, we considered the methods of interaction. We also wanted to alt text everything so that the map could be used no matter what level of vision you had or how you were interacting with it. We also need to consider other assistive devices. So what I mean by methods of interaction is you can see on our map, we actually are fairly redundant. On the right-hand side, people are able to move and click the map if they can use a mouse and see the map. But everything that happens on the right-hand side is reproduced on the left-hand side in a purely textual form. And that's not just for people who are using screen readers. This is to reinforce what's going on there. So if you click on something on the left, it zooms in on the right. If you click on something on the right, it zooms in on the left, where we also supply the extra information about the shape of the building, the access points, and all of that. So there is a lot of redundancy here, but that's so that people can use it no matter what their ability level is, as long as they can get to this page. We also, again, and I know this is repetitive, but we alt text everything. So we don't just want information about the location that you're looking at right now, but the building or even the campus that you're on, because you have to get there. You have to take the bus, know where to enter the campus. You need to know how to get to the building, which doors enter, which ones have ramps, where the elevator is, and then get to where you need to go. So the more information you can provide that form these relationships, the better your maps are going to be, really for everyone. But the final piece is we needed to consider other assistive devices. So all the work that goes into these maps isn't just a one-off for the online community. Disability Services uses it to serve all the students. So you'll see there, that is a mobile high contrast display that uses the same base map data, where they can actually plot in wayfinding courses that avoid stairs and other obstacles. So again, that same map data that we pulled in is used by them for that. They also have an awesome Braille printer. So it's a raised printer for people who are completely blind and need to navigate. So it actually prints out raised Braille names of the buildings, the edges, the pathways, and everything else. So yes, it's a lot of work up front for us to get this whole thing moving, but it's used by a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So I think I'm getting close in time. Hopefully we'll have some time for a couple questions, but I do want to point out really quick that we've actually been using this system for several years now. We are right now going through a huge rebuild for these three reasons. The first is that if you don't know this, Google Maps now charges. And if you get as much traffic as we do, they will charge you a lot of money to use it. So we're switching everything out to OpenStreetMaps. It's been a lot of work, but it's actually been a lot of fun. OpenStreetMaps is great to work with and actually can provide you a lot more information. It also can provide you some agency over your information. It's often very hard to change something in Google Maps. We have somebody who put a business right in the middle of our campus that doesn't really exist. And changing that in Google Maps has been near impossible. Changing it on OpenStreetMaps, not a big deal. We're constantly looking at ways to help people access these maps through search and filter. A lot of these, like I've been talking about, are, hey, I'm at a building, I need to find the closest restroom. So there's not a lot of search there. But we want to make sure people entering campus can do searches ahead of time to figure out where they need to go and find the best path. And the big project that I'm really excited about right now is that Disability Services is actually offered to go around and catalog every single room in the entire district so we can add that information to the maps. So this is actually a prototype OpenStreetMaps that we're working on, where you can actually interact and zoom into the campus and into the building in multitudes of ways. And I think I've got a couple examples in here. So here is the TCB building I talked about at the beginning, and they've actually mapped some of the floors directly on it with descriptions of that room. And this is really exciting to us because pretty soon we're going to be able to offer students who sign up for a class, not just here's the building you're in, good luck, have fun trying to find your classroom, but we'll be able to bring up a map of exactly where the classroom is and say, hey, here's the closest accessible bathroom, here's the elevator, here's the ramp, here's all the information you need to know. And I think we've mapped all of the major campuses right now, and so it's onto the centers, and once we have all the information in there, this is just going to be another level in that hierarchy. This is going to be the 4th level after floors. We're going to have every single classroom. All right, so that's about it. I think we have just under 5 minutes for questions. You can try out the current version of our access map at pcc.edu/accessmap. Please give me some feedback. That would be awesome. And you can reach out to me at Magnet, of course. Questions? Yes.
So I'm from the same college as Gabe, and I'm stealing all your stuff from the library. But I'm curious, can you deal with marking zones, like defining areas as opposed to just points?
So the question is in our mapping system, can you define zones, not just place marks? Yeah. So that is something that the map does not currently do for our other users. So when we need to define zones like parking zones or pathways of travel, we've been taking care of those ourselves and then manually putting them in, which unfortunately is not a sustainable way to do it. So that is one of the next steps after we get OpenStreetMaps out there, is to add a couple more things. So it's not just place marks, but pathways and I guess polygons. We would have to think about that, how we're going to define it, and how we're going to add extra accessible information to those. But it's definitely something that's possible.
Cool.
Yes?
Yeah. When you started with Google Maps, or now that you're kind of moving to OpenStreetMaps, were there accessibility issues with those technologies that you had to overcome?
So yes, the base is yes. When we started with Google Maps, it was really in its infancy, and accessibility hadn't been addressed at all. And so a lot of the work that we put in some ways that was good, because for us, a lot of the work we put in was to overcome that, to layer on top of the map, on the page itself, all the accessibility information. So now at this point, now that we're switching to OpenStreetMaps, there's not as much we have to look at for as many assistive devices, but for people interacting with the maps, being able to tab through the actual map interface, we're just starting to look at that, and that's where it comes down to testing. And so if you've got a good relationship with your disability services department, you can get students in who actually use this map and get a lot of that testing done. But no, we haven't gone that far down the road with OpenStreetMaps yet. Awesome. Yeah.
I have like 3 questions.
Uh-oh.
So is the plugin that's on WordPress.org, that's the most up-to-date one?
Really good point. I'm glad you actually brought that up. So that plugin is probably years and years and years old. Yeah. We started this project, put out a plugin pretty quickly, had a couple other colleges using it. We since then have forked the project completely somewhere else, and now we're forking it again with the OpenStreetMaps. So within the next month, maybe 2, we're going to update that completely. Okay. I'm going to try to contact a few colleges that I know who are using it as a base, because the new one works in a completely different way. We've taken advantage of WordPress API to do most of the back-end work. So like that map you saw, it's not preloading data, it's reaching out into the API and pulling it out on demand. So hopefully the next couple months will be a brand new one that'll work with OpenStreetMaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great, because that leads to another question, is even with Google Maps, because they have the floors, the college and future college map, how does that interfere with what you were doing? We've
actually, if you've had, and so you're talking about when Google actually comes out and maps. So that was a real question at the beginning of this, right? Right at the time that we were looking at creating these floor plan maps, Google was offering the service to come out and map all of our locations. And maybe they changed, but at the time we said, okay, how do we update these? And at the time, there wasn't a really good pathway to do that. And there wasn't a ton of accessibility in it. So we went a whole different route. And so when we display our maps, we don't display those levels. We're able to turn those floor plans actually off and use our own. So it's a completely custom thing, ignoring all of the data that they have. Yeah.
And then lastly, in your last building, it didn't exactly line up with the map, like your floor map. How do you adjust for that or account for that to like scooch it where you want it to be?
So the nice thing about so we were looking at a view that uses Google Maps. The nice thing about OpenStreetMaps is they're a lot more liberal about letting people come in and correct things. So we are actually at this point able to go in and correct the shapes of the buildings in OpenStreetMaps so they line up better. On Google Maps previously, we often had to actually put an overlay just to show the shape of the building because there was no way for us to tell Google or for Google to believe us that we knew the shape of our own buildings. So yeah, right now the floor plans may be off a little bit, and we're hoping that'll change as we start updating those in OpenStreetMaps. All right, I think we're done. So thank you for joining me, and let me know if you have any questions.